And welcome to the Christmas episode of Quackaholics Anonymous. No special edition for broadcasting on the Christmas holidays. As a matter of fact, I'm actually a bit of a Scrooge when it comes to the holidays. I'm not too big on them. But I think one thing I can say for certain is that I'm very grateful that I'd be sitting in these holiday AA meetings that I used to have to go through. In fact, I haven't been to those in almost a couple of years now, but I hadn't fully got rid of all those toxic people in my life either. This has actually been the first good Christmas where I haven't had any contact with any quackaholics, and I haven't had any phone contacts, and I blocked 90% of them on the social media, and it kind of brought back a memory that I was thinking about earlier this morning when I was trying to decide what topic I wanted to pull out for this particular episode. And I was thinking about, it was a point in AA where I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't have a driver's license for, a long time. It took me forever to finally get that back together. And I got that back together, by the way, through my own self-will and through my own self-determination and not through them. For a little while, they actually had me convinced, mentally up here, they had me convinced that I didn't deserve to have it back because I was never going to get sober anyway, and I was never going to get better anyway. Anything they could do to make you feel a little bit less than. They don't hesitate to pour that onto you. But I was thinking about a couple of years ago, it was Christmas, and the meeting I used to walk to, it took me about 45 minutes to get there. That was back, I guess I was a glutton for punishment back then because at the time I already knew AA was nothing but bullshit, but yet I would put myself through that kind of torture to go listen to it. I think I still was convinced there was some kind of solution at the bottom of all of that. I mean, it's a real bad place to be when you know AA is crap, but you're so addicted to going to the meetings and you're so addicted to being a cult member that you can't make yourself stop. It was a real strange thing to be addicted to the meetings because I remember it used to be like 7 o'clock at night, and I'd be thinking to myself, I've got to be out there walking to get to a meeting, and I'd go to the meeting, and lo and behold, by the time it was over with, I was even more angry, I was more upset, I was even more hostile towards those bastards in the room than I was before I got there. In other words, I would go home feeling more rotten than I did before I got there, but I just simply could not break that cycle. I just simply kept going. But then there was this Christmas that I was just now talking about where it was pretty cold, and it looked like it might rain, but it didn't really start threatening to rain until after the meeting was over with. But they read some jibber-jabber out of the literature. It's some part where Bill W. is talking about peace on earth and goodwill to men. They're actually so dumb in there that they actually think he's the one that thought that concept up. But everybody was either telling some sad tale about what a badass they were when they were back out there drinking before they got to AA and became willing, and on and on and on. Or they were bragging about how much they do to help other people today. Their whole entire life revolves around helping the new guy. They even get up in the bed in the morning and they follow the literature where it says they're not supposed to pray for themselves, so they can serve the new people and all this other kind of crap. And I'm watching these hypocrites that wouldn't piss on somebody if they were on fire, bragging on themselves, blowing their own horns. But it occurred to me that as soon as it was over with, as soon as the meeting ended, and I was walking down the street, right out of the parking lot of the meeting, it was starting to really do more than sprinkle rain. It was starting to look like it was really going to rain. And I was fumbling in my backpack for the umbrella that I used to carry with me when I walked everywhere at that time. And all these good giving people that are just there to help out other people, they all just drove right by me. And a couple of them even, they hit what looked like buildup of water or whatever, but it kind of splashed in my direction. I had to jump out of the way because it had been raining for a couple of days, so there was, puddles everywhere. These are the people that are just here to help other people, and that's actually a minute, minuscule example of the kind of double standards that you see go on in there, or not double standards, the blatant hypocrisy that you see going on in there. It made me think about when I was a new guy in AA long time ago. And, I was actually buying into this whole hocus pocus garbage, and I was going to meetings, and I was actually working steps. I cringe when I think about the things I used to say in meetings a long time ago. I mean, it just literally makes my skin crawl, that I'd ever believed in any of that. I mean, I just goosebumps all over me just thinking about it. But somebody had died. They had drank themselves to death. And I kind of figured an organization that goes around saying, when anyone anywhere reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA to be there, and for that I'm truly responsible, would show some human compassion to someone who had just drank themselves to death. I mean, for me, many times when I was active in my addiction, I can remember some seriously drunken binges where the only thing I wanted to do was either kill myself or get to another drink, unable to quit. And instead, I got all of these people bragging about how, by the grace of God, there go I. By the grace of God, there go you. In other words, what you're saying is because you go to these meetings and you do all of this, whatever it is you claim you're doing, they always are talking about service work, like they're really doing something major, when they're doing all the, or they'll say stuff like, and I'm willing to do the work. Well, what are you working on? I mean, what are you doing? I don't ever see nobody doing nothing but sitting there flapping their jaws about the work, or whatever. But these people are saying that somehow or the other they got a special umbrella around them that protects them from, ever getting drunk or anything bad happening to them, because by the grace of God, there go they. Seemed to me like at the time it bothered me because it was a really, arrogant thing that I first heard. But, sadly enough, after almost over a decade of dealing with this garbage, I've heard a whole lot worse when people die. I've heard the really arrogant phrase of, some people are just going to have to die so that others can live. Some people are going to have to die so that others can live. I'm sure they would feel differently if they were the ones out there drinking themselves to death and they were the ones chosen by fate or whatever you want to call it to die so that everybody else could live. But I don't really get that kind of thinking. I mean, how is somebody out there drinking themselves to death keeping me alive? For one thing, I've noticed since leaving AA, now that I don't have to be constantly reminded of what drinking was like over and over and over, and now that I don't live every day or all day thinking about, the disease and what I did when I was a drunk, now that I've actually cut alcohol out of my life and cut AA people out of my life altogether, there's no need to be constantly reminded of all the drudgery and the misery that was attached with addiction. There's certainly no need to sanctimoniously look down my nose at someone who's drinking themselves to death and say, well, they may just have to die so that I can live. The incredible sheer arrogance of that was one of the first things that really turned me off to AA. I remember one particular asshole. He liked to dress like he was some 1970s fucking Led Zeppelin wannabe, and he would talk in this real low voice like this, so he could scare everybody. But he would often go on and on and on about how, today I saw somebody, and they were drinking themselves to death, and they were behind a dumpster passed out. And I looked at the sky and I said, God, thank you for that gift. Thank you for that gift, God. I mean, what kind of sadistic fucking religion are you running here? I mean, is it really an elitist religion of all the unfortunate people who are suffering with their addiction problems and all the unfortunate people who are caught up in their addictions for whatever reasons? The reasons are as varied as they can be. I mean, in spite of their narrow-minded little idea that everybody fits in this, narrative of one size fits all, in other words, your cult religion, your spirituality, whatever the fuck it is you want to call it, teaches you that you get to look down on the less fortunate, and you get to feel like God gave you elevated privileges above those less fortunate people. AA kind of gives you a license to mistreat those who relapse a lot. I know, God knows, there was a pathetic time in the program when I was just on the ass end of everybody in there. Everybody just kicked me as hard as they could when I was down. I believe they got a perverse delight out of seeing me drunk and falling down and drunk and unable to defend myself and drunk and just really a pathetic shape that I was in at the time. I think they really got off on that. I mean, they treated you like they wanted you to die. They treated you as cruelly as they could. And when you got sober and they were kind of worried that you might remember all of that, which I do remember all of that, they wanted to say, well, we did that because we care about you. You know, that sounds like the classic abuser line. You know, anybody, I'm sure, who's ever been in an abusive marriage or relationship, an abusive parent or whatever, they can all tell you that those patterns are about the same. You know, you get abused, you get mistreated, and the abuser tells you he only does it because he cares about you. Or he does the classic thing that they do to people in AA when they're down on the luck. He'll tell you that you put yourself in that situation. It wasn't his fault. I mean, he had to do that because of the way you behaved. AA often absolves themselves of their own crimes by saying that to people. Well, they put themselves there. You know, in other words, if you call them out for being sanctimonious pricks over someone who's, you know, may have to die so the rest of us can live, their easy, convenient way to get off the handle with that is, well, the guy put himself there. After all, he didn't want it. Didn't want it. That's another thing that really used to confuse me quite a bit because, you know, you get in AA and what you want doesn't matter. Your will doesn't matter. Your determination doesn't matter. Self-knowledge will get you drunk. Anything involving you, pertaining to you or your life is all, you know, considered mentally defective. You know, you're not even in touch with reality. You're incapable of making any decisions without their help. But then they'll tell you it only works when you want it to. See, if something only works when you want it to work, that would imply your own will and your own determination. I kind of like what the Orange Papers, the website where the writer had pointed out that AA is actually getting, even though it has an abysmal failure rate, a terrible failure rate, like a 5% success rate, it's really not even that high because the people who quit drinking in AA was already ready to quit drinking when they got there anyway. Just like I've quit drinking since I've gotten away from AA, and I actually feel that it's behind me now, totally. Can't say that in AA because you always have to have a daily reprieve. You always have to be perpetually sick. You can never get any better. But it only works if you want it to work, even though what you want doesn't matter. It's kind of like how they tell you you're delusional and you're out of touch with reality, and you can't tell the true from the false, but you have to choose a God of your own understanding that'll work for you. I mean, I don't know how this works. I mean, do you go to the God market, you know, and you walk down the aisle and say, I don't know, this God, okay, I don't really like what he's talking about. So, well, this God over here, I don't know, I don't like that. I think I'll pick this God over here. Nobody's used him in a while. I'll take him home and he'll take me through the steps. And he only works so long as I don't drink. You could go to an AA meeting. I mean, I'm not kidding here, and you can say that you've been praying to a doorknob for 30 years and haven't had a drink in 30 years, and nobody will bat an eye at you for that. But let's just say you go to a meeting and you say you're a religious person and you belong to a religious institution. Doesn't matter which one, doesn't matter what denomination, doesn't matter if it's Christianity or whatnot. And you drink again, they'll tell you, how'd that work out for you? You know, this is an organization that claims they're spiritual, not religious, while they sit there and simultaneously tell you that they're better than all the religions, you know. And they judge the spirituality by how long you've been without a drink. You might be a 25-year guy that screws, you know, newcomer girls that just now got out of treatment and destroys their lives even further. You might be a 25-year guy that'll steal off your sponsees and exploit them for cheap labor, free labor. I used to see old timers actually sitting around outside meetings and talking about, I need a lawn mowed this weekend. We need some more new people in here. Yeah, I've actually seen that. And you can do all those things, but you're actually spiritually fit. You're actually a spiritual person because you haven't had a drink in 20 years. Now you take a guy that's actually, let's just say he's a guy that has a conscience, that has human compassion, that has basic human feelings, but he had a drink last night. He's way lower on the totem pole than the piece of shit that hadn't had a drink in a while. So they give you a license to mistreat people who are relapsing. They give you a license to mistreat those who are struggling, and they can arrogantly and smugly pronounce at the beginning of every meeting, you know, they're not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. Well, if someone's not at fault and seems to have been born that way, which is a totally baseless assertion, it's one of those things where they're just saying a lot without saying anything at all. If someone's born that way, then it would seem to me like that would give you less of a license to arrogantly say, well, they're going to have to die so that I can live, or, they didn't want it bad enough. I've actually seen people come into AA in my time there, in my decades, a little over a decade, and that really seriously want to stop doing the things they're doing, and they do everything that these bastards tell them to do, and then they end up in worse shape, or they end up in an insane asylum after attempted suicide. They're not necessarily drinking, but they've been mentally broken. And the old-timer sponsor assholes that more or less guided them for that will just say, well, they didn't want it bad enough. AA is always absolving itself of any responsibility in any wrongdoing and anything that happens. It's kind of like one old-timer bastard I used to rent from. His favorite thing to do to his sponsees was to call their girlfriends and to call their wives and to call their children behind the sponsee's back and create even more turmoil in their homes, and would actually break up families if he could get it started and set enough shit into motion. And he was one of those that would sit in meetings, and every time he was called on, the first thing he would say is, it's good to be living in God's grace today. Well, if that's living in God's grace, I'm glad I'm not. I mean, in other words, you live in this delusion that because you haven't had a drink in a long time, that somehow or the other, that makes you a good person. Well, I'm sorry, it don't. It don't make you spiritual. It don't make you nothing. It means that you're just a fucking scumbag that hadn't had a drink in a long time, but you're no less of a scumbag than some of the people I've been locked up in jail with. As a matter of fact, when it comes to some of these arrogant people that pronounce people having to die so that they can live, I would actually rather spend time in a cell with some of the worst elements that society has to offer than to even stand in the same room with these people, okay? I knew another situation where there was another one of these situations where someone's chronically relapsing. I remember this guy that would share about how he learned compassion after doing his amendments and everything, looked at me and said, that person's going to die. I mean, wow, nice to know you have some decent human feelings after your spiritual experience where you're just here to help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. But when you see someone dying, and it's almost like you get off on it. And, I've noticed since, I've mentioned before in the last couple of videos that when I left AA, I've had less problem with alcohol abuse. And I was looking at an article yesterday, it was on the social media, where some experts were saying when you feel trapped, that usually exacerbates your addiction. That makes your addiction a whole lot worse. And I got to thinking about that. I can remember times in my life when my drinking really spiraled out of control before AA, during AA, oddly enough, not after AA, but that feeling of being trapped and that feeling of being hopeless was there. Now, of course, AA cashes in on that. When you get to AA, they'll tell you, I was hopeless when I got here, and today I have a life, and they have no life whatsoever. If they didn't have those fucking rooms where they could sit in there on their thrones and feed their fucking egos, they would be nobody, What is that thing they say about real men of faith have courage? Look, you're not a real man of faith, and you don't have no fucking courage, okay? Most of these tough guys that I've seen are the biggest cowards. If you tried to call them out, they're like the schoolyard bullies. I remember one guy that used to brag all the time about what a big badass he was, and he would bully people around when they were drunk, and he'd bully people around when they were fresh withdrawing off of their drugs or alcohol or whatever, when they were vulnerable. But the minute somebody actually stood up to him, he would grab his phone and say, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to have you arrested. Well, I thought you were a tough guy, I thought you were a real tough guy here. Well, you're only a tough guy when people can't fight back. Right, okay, I get it now. But anyway, people who feel trapped, as I was saying about that article, they generally turn to their substance because, for me, I mean, it would be a lie to say that every experience I had with booze was bad. I mean, for a number of years, booze was great. When I was stressed out, it took away any kind of stress and worry. When I was feeling pretty good, it enhanced that feeling of well-being. And when I was in places in my life where I was utterly hopeless, I just kept, turning back to it more. The only problem is that the more I drank, the intolerant situation on the outside became more intolerable. Now, when I got into cognitive behavioral therapy, one major difference I noticed right off the bat was my therapist. My therapist said the end goal is to set a time and date when you're going to be well enough to get out of here, an ending date, and we're going to measure your progress up to that ending date. And at the time, I thought, this is radical because there's no ending date in AA. You're sick. You're sick eternally in AA. And, I was going over my usual rambling. The only thing I knew how to do after, almost 12 years in AA was just feed him the same regurgitated garbage that I had picked up from, during all that time in the cult. And he interrupted me right in the middle of it. And he says, okay, you were drinking because of an intolerant situation. You put the bottle down and you're still in an intolerant situation. And the only solution that was available to you, the only option that was looking like that was in front of you in order to quit your substance was just as intolerable, okay, as the life you were living drunk. Okay, there was no hope. There was no hope of getting better. There was no hope of progress. There was no hope of anything in your current life. So it's no wonder you couldn't go for long periods of time without returning to long periods of drunkenness. My pattern towards the end was really bad. And my behavior towards the end of AA was really bad. I was very, very hostile to those people. I hated those people and I let them know I hated those people. After being kicked so many times when I was down, there was just no way I could sit in there and listen to these fucking hypocrites tell me how wonderful they are and how they care about people and everything. But it's really neither here nor there. The difference between being in AA and being out of AA, not being addicted to the meetings, not having any of those people in my life today, is that I'm actually able to live in a situation where I don't think about the addiction all the time. I don't have to think about inventories all the time. I don't have to constantly make amends all the time. They had me dredging up stuff on a fourth and fifth step from 20, 25 years ago. And they were guilt tripping me about all this stuff that happened. Some of it happened when I was 16 years old, and it wasn't even that big of a deal. It wasn't like I've got some deep, horrifying, shocking secret in my life. But they were bringing up events with me that I was naive enough to trust these sons of bitches with. And they had me going around with this guilt trip over this stuff, and I realized, after getting away from them for a year or two, what the hell am I doing? Sitting around stewing over all of this stuff that's long gone, that the people that were involved in it don't even give a damn about. The ability to live without guilt, the ability to live without the misery, the ability to have people in my life today that I can talk to where the whole thing doesn't center around character defects and inventories and amends and some have to die so that I can live. They're just the sheer poison that used to just literally seep through the air in those rooms. Having that absent in my life today is like daylight and dark. It's just so much better. It's almost like AA was really some nightmarish bad dream. And I've had people say to me, well, you're not in AA anymore, so what difference does it make to you what goes on in there? You're not in AA anymore. Well, it's still going on to people. It's still going on to people out there who are struggling with addictions that could possibly end up killing themselves or end up drinking themselves to death, and they don't have to. That's why I'm doing this, okay? Because I'm going to tell you something right now. If I was still in AA and I was still going to AA and I was still going through all of that, I'd still be getting drunk. I don't have no doubt about it. There would have been no way I could have beat this problem if I'd have kept on in that endless nightmare spinning wheel, revolving door in a nightmare. I think I heard that in an old song one time. But breaking that cycle of getting away from all of that garbage, it's just been so beneficial to me today. And I got this to say. Wait a minute, am I going to rip off an AA line? Yeah, I am. I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up. But I do have this to say. If we could get if the court systems would stop making people go to those meetings, and if the drug court systems were crippled and not making people go to that religion, okay, it's unconstitutional to court order people into religion. And if the treatment industry got out of the 12-step racket that they've got going on, AA would die. I mean, I don't doubt for a minute it would die. I mean, this is the 21st century, and people, I'm hoping, are becoming a little bit more educated about the benefits of this thing that AA refuses to acknowledge, and it's this thing called science. It's this thing called medicine. It's this thing called psychiatry. In other words, it's not 1935 anymore, and to force people into this mindset of this twisted Scientology style cult religion is not only unconstitutional, it's inhumane. I guess that's it. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and whatever else it is you're supposed to say out there. I don't know. Until next week.